Allora, thanks everybody. Good afternoon. We are in Venice, we're at the Biennale. We are here, I'm here because Alejandro is not here, so he asked me kindly to take his place in this presentation. As you know, the Biennale is doing a series of meetings on meeting architecture, which allows us, the visitors, the other people to have a more direct and immediate contact with the invited architects. Some of the installation jumps on us and tell us exactly immediately what they are. Some others provoke more questions. Some others need more explanations. Some others can be the beginning of wider discussions and open discussions. So I think this project of opening up the invited team of architects of the Biennale to immediate discussion with the public was very appropriate from Alejandro and from the Biennale. And the Biennale we thank, of course, for bringing us in Venice today. Grazie. Today with us we have 5 wonderful teams. I'm gonna introduce them very quickly because probably you know a lot about them. But on the extreme left, and we have no political implications, the extreme left is Maria Giuseppina Grasso Cannizzo. Maria Giuseppina is an architect working on her own in Sicily in a very small and complicated landscape, urban landscape. She works mainly in house design, but also more bigger projects. She opened her office in the 70s, I would say, and she has been carrying on this incredibly level of integrity in her work for all these years, and the quality of the installation she did in Venice got the jury, which I was part of, I have to say, to award her with an honorable mention for the Biennale. Giuseppina showed their work in a very interesting and special way, and it will be nice to listen from her why she decided to do the installation that way and what she wanted to communicate to the audience through that installation. Then we have Amica from Assemble. Assemble is, I think, an extremely interesting team from London. I had the chance to work with them when they came to do a very small but very meaningful installation at the Maxi in 2012, I think. They are doing a beautiful work, I think. It's beautiful in a very open and deep sense because it's both interesting on the way they speculate on the idea of a building, of how a building interact with the community. And then also there is this idea of the theater, and we are in Italy, we are in a theater, and we know the Italian architects never really understood the difference between architecture and theater, basically, from Renaissance to today. And they also are developing a way of working with the people, with community, with users in a non-romantic, non-simply moralistic or manichaeistic way, but I think in a very productive way, which is also bringing a lot of innovation in the idea of architecture. So we thank them, and we thank Amica. It's so easy in Italian to pronounce your name, Amica, that you have to make an effort every time, but it sounds nicer, Amica. Alejandro is part of a jam session team, I would say, because he's I have to say all the right names now, but Alejandro is part of a group of architects that I don't know if it was your ideas of Alejandro ideas of putting you together for the Biennale, but maybe you have the chance now to tell this. They come from Mexico. They are more or less all born around the early 70s, I would say. They work in a very intense way, in a very intense landscape. With Alejandro in the team, there is Tatiana Bilbao, there is Rosana Montiel, and Derek Dellenkamp. I think they are 4 different offices, 4 different oficinas, as we say is there, and they are trying to tell us what architecture can do, because when you're in a 20 million people city, when the city has things that happens at a rhythm, at a way, with an energy, and with conditions that are so fast, so furious, so complicated, you really ask yourself, is architecture makes any sense, if architecture can give any contribution. So what they try to communicate to us, I think, has to do with this, and all of them, they architects, they build buildings, they have done houses, so they're not simply activists. They interpret. I mean, this is interesting because the three different ways of interpreting the practice of a design team in different ways. The group I have on my right is El Borde. El Borde is a group from Ecuador. It's composed by 4 architects. They are working in a way which is extremely contemporary, because we speak about very difficult conditions, very difficult economic and social conditions, but also a way of trying to achieve real results through the collaborations with people. It's not about emphasizing problems or making problems, or to stage problems through art or architecture devices, but it's really trying to solve problems, which is very clear in their work and which we very much respect. And I think Aravena was very happy to have them. They kind of opened the series in the Corderia, so it's a very big responsibility. And they also have a very expensive, in coin terms, installation. It's an installation full of money, which is incredibly interesting in this condition. The 2 friends we have on our right, which is a team from Köln in Germany, called Bell Architects, a real office, I would say, with Jörg Leeser and Anne-Julchen Bernhardt, the leader of the office. They came to us with a very strong presence in the Corderia, which is that very big blue model, which goes back to the idea of, the discussion today is, should we build houses, or we should build housing, or should we solve the problems that people have in terms of public space, relational space, collective space? Our friends are very clear and strong and straight to the point. They made an installation which is proposing a way of designing a new part of the city with an incremental device. I think the project is more about a device, to solve housing problems in some of the cities that in Europe will be growing a lot. Because, not much because of internal growth, but I think because of migration and moving of people from one side of the other of our countries. So I think it's an open discussion with very different points. What I would encourage you is simply to tell the public your points, tell the public the reason and the methodology used for your installation. And now you think your installation is more or less meeting what Alejandro Aravena was proposing to his invited authors for the Biennale. Grazie. Giuseppina. I would, no? Ok, va bene. Alejandro, go. No, pensavo che potevamo fare l'italiano. So go ahead. Let's start with the Mexican 4.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for having us here, both first for the Biennale and then now for this meeting. First of all, Alejandro invited Tatiana, Rosana, and Derek. That they are 3 architects working in Mexico in separate offices, as you said. They have worked together. They have done different kinds of things together. They did a project in Mexico which is called the Route of the Pilgrimage, that is more like an installation in a route that people go for a temple in a period of time of the year. And they work together, and they work also with Alejandro. They invited Alejandro to this project. And that's why Alejandro knew them and knew what they were doing, and they were doing work with different kind of work, but some part of their work was with social issues, housing, public space, and these kind of things. And then they invited me to do something. And what I found it was interesting when they called me was that they didn't want to show exactly what they had done, but how they were doing things. So we began to thought, how can we show in Venice something that has to do with this idea of working in the front, not only reporting in the front, but working in the front. So we had to find a front to do things. Rosana, she had been working in a community in Mexico City that is called Miravalle. Mexico City, as you may know, it's a very big city. The city is around 8 million people, but within the metropolitan area, we are almost 22 million people. Miravalle is in a part of the city, Iztapalapa, which is a district that has existed since the pre-Hispanic city, but that has grown to be one of the biggest districts of the city. It has around 2 million people. It could be a city by itself. Most of them poor people, coming from the outside of the city, building their own houses. They don't have as much infrastructure as they should have. It's a part of the city where people sometimes doesn't have water, for instance, for 2 or 3 days in a row. They are far away from the places where they work, and they also don't have enough income to improve their life conditions. And they're living in this part of the city which is not really far away from the city. You can go in metro or in bus, but given the conditions of Mexico City, you can put even 1 or 2 hours to go from the place you are working to the place where you're living. Miravalle grew around a part of the city that was, well, not of the city, outside of the city, that get in between of these neighborhoods, which is not yet a park, it's not yet a public space. And working with them, they told us when we were asking or trying to know what to do for the Biennale, or taking the Biennale as a pretext to do something there, they told us that they needed a road, a walkway to cross away this space, which was very insecure, especially at night. So then we began to think about conditions. How do you help to change conditions, and how conditions are different? And it's obvious what I'm going to say, in different conditions. We were saying, how about to make a path of light, and to show in Venice that a path of light can be almost an scenographic thing, which is it here. Almost, by times it's almost invisible here in Venice because people is walking over the path of light and they don't know what exactly it is. And that same condition, or spatial condition, to make a road with light will be something very important in the conditions of Miravalle. It will probably I want to go so far as to say to change their lives, but improve the daily conditions of their lives. There are people in Miravalle that they are walking around this park in the night, putting, I don't know, 40 minutes more into the day, the time they put to go to their homes, instead of crossing the park, because they feel it's dangerous. It's occupied by a lot of people of street gangs and people using drugs and things like that. So transforming this space in a more livable place was important, and we thought that with this road, this walkway, which is going to have in the night lighting, it would be easier. The other thing that we were thinking is the team that is very close to what they did in El Borde, thinking the idea of money, how much it would cost us to the team to make the installation in Venice, and what we could do in Mexico with the same amount of money. And not only with the same amount of money, but with the impulse of the Biennale, going to sponsors and saying, you know, we want to do an exhibition in Venice, we need money, we need your help, not for the exhibition, because we had the part of the money to make the exhibition, but to make the thing in Mexico, to make it happen. And obviously there was the problem of time, because all of this had to happen before the Biennale. So at the end we decided that we wanted to tell a story here, not to show a project, but to tell the story of how this project is going on. And in our heads, I don't know if we're going to arrive to, we are building the walkway now, but I don't know if we are going to arrive to change the video that is being shown in the Arsenale. So as the time is going on, we would like to show to the people coming to the Biennale that this work is being done. That is something that, the main idea was, well, you are asking us, Alejandro and the team from the Biennale, you are asking us to report from the front. So we wanted to build a front, because the front is there. There are many fronts, but you have to build the conditions, to understand the conditions, to work the people that is already there, and then to do something that has to do with this idea of the front, and to show to the people coming to the Biennale here in Venice what exactly we are doing there, and how, in this case, two specific conditions, money and a spatial condition, light, can change. Here it can be almost a scenographic trick to attract people, and there it can be something to improve people's lives. So that was the core of the project.
Very clear. I think the presentation is very clear. I have to confess that in the beginning we had problem with the installation because it was not perfectly captionized, I would say, and it risked to get lost. It's much better now that you can understand better. But the idea of crossing a piece of the Arsenale with this street of light, it's quite interesting. But I mean, you challenge the audience. You want the audience to really, and also there's many other issues that come to me with your speech, but maybe we'll talk about this later. So the role of a cultural institution, what is architecture doing in the museums? Yeah. Now, how do we turn this into society instead of freezing it in the museum? So there's many things maybe that will feed a discussion after. I would like to move from South America to Europe and then back to South America. So Amica Dall, who's part of Assemble. Assemble is a lot of people, so it's up to you to explain how it works. They have a very immediate installation in the Corderia. It's a video. It's a very comfortable series of seats where you can stay and watch the video. So just tell us, how did you decide and what did you wanted to do with this installation on your front? Grazie.
Hi. So I'm about just over 5% of Assemble. There are 18 of us, and part of that means that we work in a non-hierarchical way. We're a collective. We've been working together for about 6 years. But part of being a collective that doesn't have a hierarchy means that we can't really speak for each other. And so it's always it's really interesting being in this context and presenting something as Assemble when it's really such a multitude of voices. But to explain where that project has come from, it helps a little bit to explain where we came from. And we started as a very informal, voluntary grouping of people that were mainly architecture graduates, though not only architecture graduates, who were incredibly frustrated, the majority, working in Part 1 architecture jobs, like detailing toilets and doing door schedules, and just wondering what all that stuff that they'd learnt at school meant. And we went to a school that was relatively politically engaged, and I think the contrast was quite jarring. And so we came together and built a couple of temporary projects, really without any money, using what we could beg and borrow and steal in a kind of constant improvisation that involved hundreds of other people, kind of without planning. And it was really enjoyable and really exciting, but also really empowering to really take part in our own city and the place that we lived in that way. And so as we've started to become more formal and work in a more deliberate way, what we have tried to do is create conditions that enable other people to also develop that kind of relationship with the place that they live, the place that they work, the place that they go through every day. And we're in a totally exceptional situation of being really young with no responsibilities, through fortune having amassed a large number of people. And so the interesting struggle for our practice was to try and understand how you make that atmosphere, how you create that kind of condition, and how you put resources and power into it that mean that it can be acted on in a meaningful way without over-determining the outcomes, right? So you build opportunity and you have to, it's that funny balance of making sure you don't also decide what people do with that opportunity. And the project that we decided to show here is a project, it's an ongoing piece of research about children, because over the last 3 years we've been working with lots of different children, but particularly intensively with a group of about 30 children who live in East Glasgow in Scotland. And working with them, we've learnt an extraordinary amount from them and with them. And I guess it's partly just due to who children are and what children are in society. At a really high level, they're probably, and this is quite a controversial thing to say, some of the most disempowered people globally, right? They can't vote. In the UK, at least, they can't earn. And huge parts of the city are barred to them because you need money or you need permission or you need to be old to go there. And it's controversial because a lot of people would say, well, you know, that's for their own good. We make decisions for them, we protect them and we nurture them. And our question, I guess, working with children is then, how can you make space in lives that are generally quite curtailed or controlled for children to experience firsthand in a meaningful way what it means to make a difference, to change the world, to meet your dreams or your desires or your needs by yourself or collectively as children. And it's quite interesting because I guess as we started doing that work, what we discovered was quite a wide movement in Europe that was really about children's rights. And it varies, you know, it has some very radical ends. There are people that express it as the struggle of, you know, this century alongside the struggle for women's rights in the 20th century or workers' rights in the 19th century. And put in that context, it feels quite epic, quite extraordinary. But I guess the thing that we were really interested in was children's freedom. And I think we thought about freedom or capacity to change the world around you in terms of adults a lot. And I think the thing that working with children really taught us is that to be meaningful, freedom isn't a negative thing. It's not the lack of constraint. Meaningful freedom has to be made up of positive possibilities. And for children, you have to build those possibilities and you have to make them work on the scale of a child, at the time scale of a child. And to do that whilst balancing enabling them to have freedom of expression and to change the world around them is quite a difficult thing. The kids that we were working with in East Glasgow is a faded industrial area. It's one of the most deprived neighbourhoods in Northern Europe, so about 50% of the kids of the area we were working in live below the poverty line, but there's also complicated social issues that's hard to sum up, but I guess as a picture, alcohol use among the adult population in that area was about 300% higher than the Scottish average. It was a complicated place. And what those children really revealed to us was something very deep about the way that we organise cities and who spaces belong to and who they're for. Because you take a child growing up in that place with no access, really, in a meaningful way to the resources a city has to offer, and you're presented with a kind of bare life, you know. You learn a lot about how we think about each other and how we organise ourselves, thinking about the situation that child is in. And we had a budget to build a project with them, and what we did was ring-fence about 75% of it to spend on staff, and spent a very small amount, 25% of it, on building physical infrastructure. And then those adults there really make the environment, and they make an ongoing possibility which enables the children to experience being part of a collective decision-making process, changing things to meet their needs. And they do that through play. And so what our film shows is different spaces from all around the world, from Mexico, also from Japan and from Copenhagen and from Spain. And all of those spaces are places where someone or some group of people are fighting to make space for children and to give them a space they have a meaningful right to use. And the voices in the film, so the images are all children playing. And playing is the evolved mechanism for learning. Children have a biological need, but also a legal right to play. And play is really how they express themselves. We quite often try and make children express themselves verbally, but children are still learning how to speak, how to manipulate language. But the thing that comes really naturally to them is playing. And so in trying to understand urban childhood, to try and understand the relationship between the child and the city, the thing that we learned visiting those places, but also working with those kids in Glasgow, was that you have to learn to listen to children by listening to the way that they express themselves. And that, as often as not, means really watching how they play. And as an adult, that's a really rare privilege, because normally as an adult, when you come into a situation where children are playing, you change it instantly. Like, your presence changes the dynamic, it changes the possibility. And so what we've tried to capture in the film is what happens when children are really by themselves and really interacting with their environment in a really primary way. And then the voices which are overlaid are adults who have spent their working lives building spaces for children, campaigning for children's rights in relation to the city, talking about why they think it matters, about the future, about the hope that they have, about the way that children express themselves, and also some very, and I think issues that people maybe wouldn't expect people that are professional, essentially childcare individuals to express. They're talking very philosophically about power, often about politics, about rights, and that's just stuff that they've learnt working in a very direct way with children. And some of the things that they have to say, or the ways of looking at the world through the eyes of children, which they've had to do their jobs gradually over the years, are incredibly revelatory, I think, of much wider issues. And so our film, I guess, really is just trying to share their voices and give you some glimpse of the kinds of opportunities within a city that they're trying to protect and promote. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's their words, not ours. So I'd recommend going and listening to them.
Thank you. This was extremely clear. This raises some things like, I mean, but in both these presentations we heard a lot. We spoke a lot more about the people who are using the things you do versus the thing itself, no? Which is a completely new paradigm in the architecture discourse, and maybe it would be nice to come back on this after. Esteban Benavides, the El Borde, coming from Ecuador, which put a lot of money around the corderia. They are a collaborative. Most of these cases we find collaborative groups that collaborate among architects, but also collaborate with communities. So maybe you can tell us about both the way you work and the work you presented here in the Biennale.
Thank you. First of all, we are very happy to be here. We want to thank all the organization of the Biennale. The people have been very helpful to us. We are really happy with all the work we have done here.
You are El Borde in half of the Biennale documents and Al Borde in the other half, so you made the stage once and forever.
I want to start with a question that I imagine Keith could do if he saw our installation, like something like, this is supposed to be the Architektur Biennale, why there is a lot of money in that installation. What it has to do with architecture discipline. And I will answer that by telling that I think it was a breaking point in our careers, in our lives. When we were students, maybe it would happen to some of you. You study and you learn how to do all these museums and houses for artists, and I don't know, try to implement these theories in one terrain or another, and you are judged by your creativity and how you develop these worlds of your imagination in the paper. But when you go out in the real world, you found a very big gap between what you learn and what you are and what your work is supposed to do. So it came out first from the budgets for us, and then we started to realize that our context, our world, Ecuador, is very, very different, and Latin America is very, very different from Europe. I don't think I have enough words to explain all this difference, but this started to influence how we take decisions in the project. What does mean aesthetics in this kind of conditions? What is the meaning of resources? What is the meaning of clients and the role of architect in these conditions? So we answer that by focusing a lot on the reality that surrounds us, and we found a role for the architect as something like a problem solver, because you have these notions about construction, about technique, and how this knowledge that you have could actually resolve some problems. Also, we are not naive, and we know that architecture is almost the ultimate layer of social changes. You need a lot of previous work in order to realize this architecture that we are attempting to do. But nevertheless, we like to imagine ourselves. This is something we were talking yesterday in the Greek pavilion with Nicholas. We like to imagine ourselves like this series of the 80s, of the 90s, this MacGyver guy, do you remember him? That like he take a paper clip and something he found and then he mixed everything and make a bomb. Well, that's how we like to think of us. You can see the 8 projects that we present in our installation. One is private housing, the other one is a public infrastructure for a school in a rural beach area. The other one is a train wagon that changes from public spaces and travels through a lot of stations. Well, you can check the installation yourselves. But in order to complete these resources, we need to materialize our architecture. We have to understand what is particular of our context and our reality and how we can use it. And there is where we found these dark resources we are calling in the exhibition. Dark resources, it refers to these things that are more difficult to measure. Like, this dark energy concept of the universe that is the 90% of what is out there, but we really don't know too much about it, but we know it's there. We feel that kind of way to our resources, to the resources we use. We need money, of course, but it's not the only resource we can use in our particular way of approaching problems. All of this that we learn, all of this that we are trying to apply in our discipline, we learn because basically there weren't too much other options for us to select. Either we do something like this, or we would have to be, or we were working in an office doing plans or something like that. So we believe that is in the moments of real needs and crisis that people became more creative to resolve this kind of issues. And when we talk about crisis, is another thing that we were discussing yesterday in the dinner. When we talk about crisis, it's a little bit different from the crisis in Europe. For example, one fact that we were sharing last night was that when the time we were studying architecture in Ecuador, we have these 10 years where Ecuador had 11 presidents. And it was because of revolutions that turned down the presidents, and we lost our coin. We now have the dollar. But nevertheless, we are not complaining and not using this panorama to justify something that we do. We are trying to say that this panorama requires us to think very different, and maybe we can't. It's not smart to try to import theories that are developed in Europe or in the United States and try to apply them in our context, because they are think for another world, and people who designed these theories and who designed these ways to approach architecture were living in a very different context. I think that what we are trying to say is that we need to somehow focus in the particularities that we are addressing in every work or every approach to the architecture we have. We are trying to drop dogmas and these paradigms, because what you are trying to solve is a particular issue, and then changes your mind from architect to another thing that is close to our discipline. And it has to be as good at architecture as the one who has a $1 million budget. Because it isn't a justification, is that it? It isn't a justification, these things of low budget and they are built in some kind of not so good way. We are trying to say that we should ask for architects the same quality that is building a museum of $100 million or something to the social housing that is. And the last question that I wanted to ask ourselves is why we choose to be to work in that condition, to work with not the 5% of projects that are addressed as architecture discipline, but with the 90% of problems that are that involve our discipline. And I think it is because we feel part of this 90%. We want to be involved in these kind of problems that are very related to us and to our condition. And that's about our work.
Very good. Thank you. It was extremely clear, and it also, I will ask you later, where is utopia and where is realism? Because it's a very swinging condition, which is very interesting to address. Maybe we go back to Europe, and if Sicily is Europe, we go back to Sicily, and we ask Giuseppina to explain, maybe to tell 2 words about the installation, and then 2 words about her work.
Forse anche io devo fare un piccolo riferimento, dico, al posto dove lavoro, perché evidentemente sono in Europa, ma insomma appartengo all'Europa in maniera veramente, cioè l'ultima frangia dell'Europa, insomma, ci sentiamo forse molto più vicini al Nord Africa che non sicuramente al centro dell'Europa, al nord dell'Europa. Io ho deciso, subito di cominciare, per poi trasferirmi definitivamente in Sicilia. A 40 anni, comunque già nel 74 ho aperto il mio studio in Sicilia, sapendo, insomma, e quindi ho assistito diciamo, agli anni della trasformazione del territorio siciliano sotto la spinta di una nuova economia che nasceva. Io vivo forse nella parte più ricca della Sicilia, se si va per dire più ricca, comunque dove la trasformazione, cioè il benessere economico è arrivato all'inizio degli anni 60, e quindi da quando ero ragazza o ragazzina ho assistito al cambiamento del territorio radicale. Eravamo in una situazione molto difficoltosa in cui insomma, la maggior parte della popolazione viveva in condizioni comunque molto disagiate, vivevano in 7-8 in una camera, c'era promiscuità, io le ho conosciute queste cose, me le ricordo perfettamente, insomma non esistevano quasi macchine, o perlomeno erano appannaggio di pochi, quindi ho vissuto poi il momento in cui, diciamo, una serie di piccoli, diciamo, di contadini molto intraprendenti cominciano a scoprire che forse c'è un modo per rendere più produttivo un suolo, perché non abbiamo acqua, o perlomeno per trovare l'acqua da noi devi scendere a grandi profondità, quindi si poteva però arrivare a un'economia diversa, e scoprono diciamo una produzione protetta, quindi sotto serra, cambia totalmente l'economia. Questo cambiamento, come spesso succede in Italia, credo, non è stato assolutamente compreso da chi in qualche modo governava il territorio, e quindi queste persone che improvvisamente cominciano ad avere una diversa disponibilità, non dico enorme, però che possono auspicare, diciamo, o desiderare un tetto dove vivere con una famiglia in condizioni, diciamo, migliori, evidentemente non trovano risposte, i piani regolatori non esistevano.
No, Giuseppina, she makes a premise. She works in a very specific area of Italy, which we classified as Europe, but that in certain moment of our history, or even now, you could question, no, if it's more Mediterranean than Europe. And Sicily was, my mother was from Sicily, so I know the situation. Sicily was a very poor land till a few years ago, till a few decades ago, where people used to live in conditions that maybe are more similar to the ones that Alejandro and Esteban were describing before versus what happens in Northern Europe. But then this very poor agricultural landscape started to change, developing some new ways in a land where it's very difficult to be an agricultor because there's no water is very deep down. So they found out that they could develop an agriculture made out of greenhouse, and then later probably about vineyards. And so people started to have money to have a house where you don't have to live in 8 people in one room, and started to have some more money to have a decent house. And it often happened in Italy with institutions, but also disciplines probably, were not ready to give these people an answer to their new demands, to the new questions, the new demands, the new needs they were expressing.
Per cui ho assistito proprio al ridisegno di un territorio giorno per giorno, senza nessuna programmazione, senza nessuno spinti, diciamo, quello che oggi, di cui parlavamo, le domande erano generiche, ovviamente, erano persone che avevano vissuto senza nulla, quindi la domanda era assolutamente generica, e la risposta però non poteva essere generica, la risposta doveva essere precisa, e lì ho cominciato a capire che forse, diciamo, il nostro lavoro forse si doveva occupare, intanto lavorare sulle persone, sul territorio, lavoro che evidentemente non è previsto dalla nostra disciplina, e quindi bisognava lavorare prima di tutto su di loro, insieme a loro, e per dare, diciamo, delle risposte che fossero risposte di architettura, se così si può definire, e cioè quindi anch'io ho lavorato e ancora continuo a lavorare con economie piuttosto piccole. Credo di aver prodotto, insomma, i migliori lavori sono stati quelli a più basso budget. La questione, diciamo, che, ecco, adesso io sono sempre molto confusa nell'esposizione, ecco, diciamo che il momento in cui a Ravenna mi ha invitato, intanto sono stata sorpresa perché era difficilissimo trovarmi, non avendo né un sito né un numero di telefono ufficiale né nulla di tutto questo, ed è arrivato, non so come, forse a caso, insomma qualcuno gli avrà dato un mio recapito, e mi ricordo che la prima email è stata quella: sei tu Maria Giuseppina, sto cercandoti disperatamente. E allora ho risposto, questo il 10 di agosto.
So the question was this social transformation would lead people to have expectations and demands to send to the institutions or also to the professionals, but these questions were very generic, and the answers by the institution were also generic, where this answer were not to be generic. So what Giuseppina understood when she went back to Sicily after graduating in Rome, I think, no, of course, was that maybe she had to work with the people, to start from the people, to start from the territorio, to start by talking to the people, by investigating. So she started this work, which you can see is incredibly individual, no? Because it's built one-to-one in the relation with the people she works with, but also it's very much in terms of architecture. So the idea of the utopia she was looking for was an utopia in which very complicated questions coming from the development of a country, from the political and social transformation of a context, could find answers in architecture. And it's very interesting, I think, for all of us, that the best results, she claims, is when she worked with very low budget, with very normal people, very lower class people, and I think the best results she achieved were in this situation. So she was very much surprised when Alejandro called her, and especially because she doesn't have a website, she doesn't have an official professional address. So Manuela maybe was so good to find her. So the first email that got to Giuseppina was: "Are you really Giuseppina Grasso Cannizzo?"
E comunque il momento in cui, insomma, mi ha invitato, la prima cosa che non ho voluto fare è mettere in mostra un lavoro, perché non mi interessava la questione. Quindi lui ha chiesto una cosa precisa, ho riletto più volte le email e in realtà io dovevo individuare una battaglia, e penso che quello che abbiamo fatto, credo tutti. Era molto difficile all'interno del mio lavoro individuare una battaglia, perché la battaglia io la conduco tutti i giorni, purtroppo, quindi, cioè purtroppo, per mia fortuna forse, e quindi insomma sono anche una abbastanza, non sembra, ma insomma sicuramente molto combattiva, poi no, molto combattiva, quindi tutti i giorni, però diciamo questa Biennale non poteva essere un lamento, diciamo, della nostra condizione o del nostro lavoro, della difficoltà a trovarlo. Io non volevo assolutamente fare questo, quindi la cosa che due erano, diciamo, le possibilità su cui potevo lavorare, su cui ho scritto 2 testi, poi ne ho scelto uno prima di mandarlo ad Ravenna. Una era quella del progetto come armistizio, e quindi tra le parti, in cui l'architetto evidentemente ha un ruolo, ma non è, diciamo, l'unico soggetto interessato, che ho scartato perché era molto difficile trovare poi una forma di installazione per questo, almeno io non ci sono riuscita, perché contemporaneamente pensavi anche, scrivendo il testo, anche a una possibile immagine di un'installazione. E la seconda era quella dell'onore perduto. Onore perduto che per me significa, diciamo, appunto avendo assistito, diciamo, al disastro, diciamo, del territorio non solo siciliano, credo anche italiano, senza nessuna, appunto, programmazione né richiesta di architettura di qualità, mi sembrava la cosa migliore rispondere rispondere alla all'invito di Aravena, ponendo l'attenzione sulla piccola scala, che era l'unica cosa su cui in realtà io per 40 anni ho lavorato e sto continuando a lavorare. La piccola scala perché a mio parere è quella che comunque ridisegna non solo il territorio ma anche le nostre città. Evidentemente al di fuori della programmazione delle istituzioni, al di fuori di tutto questo, l'unica differenza in realtà è che questo lavoro diciamo, è molto più lento nel tempo e quindi il disegno della città in realtà è imprevedibile, quello finale, cioè nessuno di noi ha cognizione di quello che succederà tra 30 anni. Certo, diciamo, se ogni architetto si assumesse la responsabilità diciamo, del controllo non solo dell'intero processo, che questo io lo sostengo anche sporcandosi le mani, ecco, ma anche di lavorare sul territorio, sulle persone, di lavorare sulle maestranze, che sono anche quelle coautori del progetto. Se allora uno lavora in questo modo, dico, è probabile che tra 30 anni, 40 anni forse restituiamo un'altra immagine di una città che non possiamo conoscere.
Adesso dimentico tutto. When Alejandro called Giuseppina, the first statement she did was, I don't want to show a project, I don't want to show a building, I don't want to simply display my architecture work in the Biennale, so I have to think of something else. So she thought of two possible answers when Alejandro asked everybody to write a page. And the two possible answers for her, one was the idea of an armistice. So the architect as one of the actors of an armistice, a deal between all the actors that are around the idea of a project, no? The city, the client, the rules, the conditions, the workers. But it was not easy to turn this into an installation project, so she moved to the second option. The second option was the idea of the lost honor. So architecture has the battle she wanted to describe, the front she wants to report to Alejandro was the front of the lost honor of the architect and the battle that the architect has to do to engage, to regain this lost honor. And the device Giuseppina individuates to fight for this lost honor is the idea of the small scale. And the small scale is kind of also something recurring today, no? To working in immediate contact with the people, to work in immediate contact with the people who makes with the maker and teach the maker and learn from the maker. And also to insert, to kind of inoculate this small-scale process in the idea of the city, so that the city, because we know that in the city small scale is sometimes more important than the large scale, and also small scale enacts transformation which we will be ready to really see all in a long span of time, no? Like 20, 30 years. So the small scale has the device both to save the architect from the desperation of the lost honor, but at the same time the small scale also has the device to give an answer which would bypass the hostility and the blindness of the institutions in the control of the
diciamo che tutto questo viene fuori, diciamo, dalla decisione personale di non aspettare. Dico, io quando ho cominciato a lavorare, ho cominciato, diciamo, perché il mio professore con cui lavoravo all'università mi ha presentato con il lavoro pubblico, ma i prezzi che io dovevo pagare in Sicilia per lavorare col pubblico lavoro erano per me insopportabili.
Yes, of course. She decided to work privately with private clients because, of course, to work with the public institution in Sicily meant to come across a word which was not easy to deal with.
Quindi il problema era quindi, Pippo, scusami, ma il problema era quindi come riuscire a incidere su un territorio senza utilizzare il pubblico.
The idea was how to start transformation bypassing the institution, the public subject. So to do something they were not able to stop. Descrivi l'installazione.
Vabbè, l'installazione, la cosa più difficile è stata quella di scrivere il testo a mano per il catalogo.
The most difficult part was to write handwriting the text for the catalog.
Quella è stata la cosa per me più difficile. Beh, l'installazione in realtà era molto difficile anche lì per me, perché io ho un'economia, diciamo, al limite della sopravvivenza e non potevo investire, nel mio studio non poteva investire nulla. Non volevo, insomma, per un problema mio di carattere, innescare uno scambio con un eventuale sponsor, perché mi domandavo quale sarebbe stato poi il mio debito e forse era insostenibile, e a questo punto la questione era che non potevo prendere nessuno per aiutarmi, e quindi la mia cosa è stata quella di inventarmi una cosa che potevo fare da sola, senza aiuto di nessuno, mettendo mano al mio archivio. Evidentemente questo perché? Perché da una cosa scritta da Ravenna, a cui io poi faccio riferimento nel mio testo, che è questa descrizione di questo rinoceronte, che non è solo, ecco, di questo che c'è anche nel video e tutto quanto. Da questa cosa decido che in realtà l'unico modo per esporre questo poteva essere un'installazione di carta, che poteva arrivare in 3 scatole di piccola dimensione, quindi non c'era neanche un costo di trasporto, non c'era un problema di assicurazione, c'era l'idea che comunque all'interno del mio lavoro che niente dura per sempre e quindi poteva essere distrutta. Questo me l'hanno impedito perché non so chi mi ha detto ma deve durare 6 mesi perlomeno, in realtà non era questa la previsione, e quindi ho deciso di rappresentare questo nugolo di zanzare che in qualche modo affrontano non solo il capitale ma anche tutto il resto, insomma, perché il rinoceronte per me non rappresenta solo la speculazione, anche quella, ma anche altre cose anche più pesanti, e l'unico modo era quello di insomma, stampare su questa una parte del mio archivio, per dare anche l'idea che la piccola scala in realtà non è solo, insomma, non ha come argomento, tema solamente la casa, può essere qualsiasi cosa, può essere la stalla, può essere il piccolo intervento, una casa come ho fatto di 25 metri quadrati, può essere qualsiasi cosa.
Ecco. Fammi tradurre. Grazie. The idea is that the idea for Giuseppina was very much about the constraints. She wanted to realize the installation with the exact fee that the Biennale was giving to the architects. She didn't want sponsors, she didn't want to owe anything to anybody. So the idea was to build an installation which would be easy to build, easy to transport, made of paper, with no insurance problem, and which could even ruin along the Biennale if you want. So that's what she did. She built this space, done with images coming from her archive that are mixed with no logic, which brings you in this space where you can see all the potential of this idea of the small scale as a device which is important not only to build small scale building like the house, but which is a device that goes across the whole architecture world. I think that's it. Dobbiamo far parlare anche gli altri. E poi dopo ti ridò la parola dopo. And I think this was very successful and the jury actually acknowledged it. So we will come back to you, Giuseppina, but I want to also to invite our German friends to join the conversation. We are actually going back to a larger scale, or on a different idea of a larger scale. So because Bell architects in the exhibition are proposing a device to build a city for the newcomers, a device which will go along the years, as Giuseppina was saying now, so develop in a long time, so you must be optimistic to do something like that. And so I think it's a beautiful blue model you can see in the middle of the Corderie, and I'm very happy to give them the opportunity to explain it and to present it. Grazie.
In order to explain our project, I have to go back to the beginnings of our office, which was 16 years ago, and maybe it wasn't necessarily by choice that we happened to slide into low budget or no budget projects. We did competitions on libraries and museums in the very beginning, but our first commissions were all commissions with no money. And that also caused us to, I think when we founded the office, we were determined to what we always called work in reality. We were fascinated what would be the world outside of architecture. And well, this happened to come together. Our first client had no idea what architecture is. We spent an awful lot of time building his house, which was also a partially self-built house. And this went on and on and on. And we did a lot of projects that were conversions or worked in the context. We did interventional projects to reclaim urban space. And but those were not the projects that Alejandro approached us with. But when he called us, he wanted to have a particular project in the exhibition, which is a project that we built in Hamburg on the International Building Exhibition. And it's a self-built project, what we call base and settler. So half of it is professionally built by a construction company and by a developer, and the other half is built by the inhabitants. And what's special maybe about this building is when we won the competition, the IBA then told us, okay, go out and find an investor. And as you can imagine, it's not that easy to find an investor for a self-built project. So we spent a lot of time finding someone, and we actually found a very professional, big-scale investor. We found a do-it-yourself superstore that would support us, and we found a a company that produces, how you call this, light concrete materials, insulated concrete. And all of them were interested in developing new markets, because our usually self-built in Germany is by homeowners. They have do-it-yourself superstores, they get some material and then they expand their house in the yard. It's usually private homes. What we did was an inner city, like a dense, multi-story apartment building. And for the building industry, that was interesting because that was a prototype. So it was not only working with the people, but it was also working with the market. And this was also the reason why we always worked in low-budget projects, because Germany, even though it's a very wealthy country, likes to save money. And when Alejandro asked, we said almost the same thing as Maria Giuseppina. We didn't just want to exhibit this project. We wanted to develop that project on what we then said, a grand scale. Because I think what's missing in Germany right now is a bigger idea of the problems that country is facing right now. We all know about the demographics of European countries and Japan, that in a matter of 20 years, the countries are going to decline because there is no youth supporting the pensions of the elder. And as we all experience right now, there's an influx of refugees, and Germany accepted 1.3 million refugees in 1 year. So that is, I'm really bad in math, how many percent that is, but it's a large number. And what we wanted to point out with that project was, first, Germany is an immigrational country, and it's good for Europe to be immigrational countries because it kind of it flourishes, it helps keeping up the economy and keeping up society. With our self-built projects, we also wanted to introduce the notion of pride and the notion of the building process as being something that creates society, something that creates groups. even though it might work in a market situation. So you get a neighborhood, you get people that work together, they were all builders. And then we were very dissatisfied with thinking about the grand scale. We were very dissatisfied with urbanism in Germany at the moment. It still believes in the Siam, sort of, in the Siam conventions that functions are separated. It's not a mix, it's a master planning, it's not incremental, and it doesn't really use the potentials that would be a new approach to large-scale projects. And so we then chose, our first approach was, we wanted to build all of Germany. And we also wanted to give a comparison to a similar situation in Germany, which was right after the war, World War II. And as you may know, all the German ethnicities that have lived in Eastern Europe for as much as 600 or 700 centuries, they were expelled from Eastern Europe for good reasons, and they came to Germany, to what was left of Germany, and those were 12 million people, and they came to Germany in a matter of 10 years. So we made that comparison, and we just proposed, okay, in the next 10 years, counting the number of refugees, we will have an influx of 12 million people. But on top of that, we also have a development that people are moving in the metropolitan cities. Even in Germany, they're fleeing from the rural areas. There are no jobs. The little towns are collapsing in a way. So there is not only refugees, but also an internal migration, and many people would never think that in this saturated, kind of quiet, regulated country, there actually is a housing crisis at the moment, even without the refugees. So with this comparison, we wanted to study the mechanisms applied in the 1940s and 50s after the war, how they did it, and we discovered that there was kind of a benevolent, powerful elite that determined what was done. So it was like the ultimate master planning. They executed plans they had already made during the war. So it was an elite that already was formed during the war. So you might think that is not very incremental, but it was still successful. People were happy to find dwellings, they were happy to find order and jobs, and it was part of what is called the Wirtschaftswunder. It was a very important factor of the economy. And that's what we also say, growth. I mean, Germany will experience growth and shrinking at the same time. Areas will shrink, others will grow. And we are proposing that with this incremental urbanism, and we call this elastic urbanism, something that is not finished yet. It's an open system, it leaves gaps, it incorporates the reality. We don't say it all has to be beautiful architecture. You can have this really banal supermarket right within our urbanism, and it won't hurt us. Because it's an open process, and it's a process of interaction, or what we call co-production. So it still means that there's some sort of larger planning. So someone has to define the framework, and if you want to include the market economy, we are not producing barrios or favelas in Germany. That would be completely unreal, because there's no informal economy in Germany. So we still have to address the... But actually, I have to say there is a little bit, but that would be too much. Italian pizzeria. Yeah. So what we are proposing can can be understood as an economical model, as an urban model, as a social model, and it can be executed by private clients or investors, but I think we are also addressing the political system, because we say back then in the 1940s it was a civic housing program, so there was a responsibility for the society which has completely collapsed since Thatcher, Reagan and Kohl.
Thank you. I think we have a beautiful panorama. I would do two things. First of all, I would encourage il pubblico, the public, the audience, to ask questions if you want. If you want me to warm up the situation, I have questions. It's also comments. It's interesting because we have different generations here, and only in one case we saw the installation dedicated to represent the project, no? Because Giuseppina did something else, like she incorporated the fragments of her projects in a space. Amica and the Assemble brought a video. You did an installation. It's interesting because maybe for the younger groups, they are convinced that people would look at their projects on a website, where Giuseppina has no website. So where you actually brought the project. So this already, I mean, what should be, also because Alejandro Aravena had a big task this year to show how a Biennale could be done after such a radical cut done by Rem Koolhaas. So what's your idea on what an architecture exhibition should be? No? How is there a distance? Because I mean, in the case of the Assemble, there could be even no distance, no, between their work and an architecture exhibition. And it's interesting because they do ephemeral projects, and when they come into the exhibition, they don't do the project. So I would like to hear from you, especially from the younger group, what because we know that the relationship between the cultural institution and architecture is evolving a lot. No? We're learning art devices. So what do you think the role of an architecture exhibition is? And maybe how did you find it here in this Biennale? You want to start?
Thank you. Well, that's a question. I was going to say that's a difficult question. That is the question, I think so. I was remembering when you were asking this about the Mexican pavilion here in Venice. When I saw not completely successful, but I am the editor of a magazine in Mexico, and a couple of years ago in Koolhaas Biennale, I wrote that I didn't like the Mexican pavilion, and when my friends in Mexico asked me how it is this new pavilion, I said I like the idea of the pavilion. I found it very interesting, and blah blah blah. And when friends that came to the Biennale, to the opening, saw the pavilion, they told me, I don't like it, but I understand why you like it. And he told me it is because he was pointing at me, you're not interested in architecture as a way of expression. You're interested in architecture as a way of knowledge. And Mexican pavilion is all about knowledge, how you construct knowledge and you preserve knowledge to build things that can be buildings, but that can be also social relations and spaces and things like that. Probably the Mexican pavilion didn't get it quite right, because you get lost with that idea. And probably also we, the Mexican singers in LA, we get lost in that also, because we wanted also to provoke with that idea. And I think that the problem is that we're trying to show, after too many years of object-oriented architecture of big names and of big budgets and of big glossy covers of magazines, to show other things that they are telling us. It's not that we architects are arrived to that. They are telling us that that's what we have to do. that we have to involve with people, with the people, the way people is. This is not the first Biennale. We had with Fuchsas more ethics and aesthetics, people meeting architecture with Sejima, common ground with Chipperfield. So it's this idea of how people get involved in something that we have. I don't know in the context of Europe or of Italy, but in Mexico we have for many years architects been saying people is not longer interested in architecture, but it is rather us that we have took a step away and only been talking about architecture. So I don't know if we have been successful in showing this other way of getting involved with the community, but it's obvious that there's kind of thinking in another way.
Yeah. Amica, you want to add? What's the role of residents in museums and architecture exhibitions?
It's quite a problematic point for us at the moment. Last year, rather unexpectedly, we found ourselves exhibited in art galleries, and we actually experienced that as quite a traumatic kind of severance, actually, and it felt very confusing, particularly as the objects which had been produced through the project that was being exhibited aren't designed for that kind of scrutiny. And they aren't designed to exist in an abstract space. They're very much of the place they've come from, and they bear the mark of the hand and accident. And they work in concert, and they respond materially to where they're from. And they just look weird in the gallery, because you're supposed to live with them, not look at them. And for us, it was an interesting problem, actually, to be invited here, because the context was really interesting, right? The conceptual setup, but the challenge remained the same, that ultimately you were taking a practice which was relational. It's essentially a social practice, which sometimes results in buildings, but often we build them ourselves, sometimes results in objects, sometimes results in organizations, and trying to translate that. And so for us, it was a total experiment in making a film to just try and make something which was representational. And it's partially successful. It's quite boring at times, I think. It's long. And it was really just us having a go, thinking about how we talk about what we do and whether there is actually any value in that discussion, and like how much of the thing that you think is valuable is it possible to take and bring, and how much do you contribute just to a kind of spectacle about yourself. And I don't know, I guess I have to come back in a few months and see it.
It's a wonderful answer. You want to add that?
I think that it also was a big search for us, and what we were interested in was in how these exhibitions and museums can get out of the museum and can benefit what we really do, because we are not specialized in this kind of installations, but we are in the world that I mentioned before. So we thought, first of all, we address this as the same way we address projects. So I think that if we raise money, I'm pretty sure that we won't bring it to the arsenal. I think if we raise money, we know a couple of sites that will need it more. Yes. So we first of all, we weren't interested in raising money, and the second thing was how the resources that we have here can help us with the job that we are doing there. So, in a way, we work with local material, not transportation, because they gave us money. So we made the installation with money, pretty straightforward. And then we work with local reality. Also, we were interested in putting this comparison. Between the square meter that we work there and the square meter here in Venice, because it kind of shows this world and these contrasts we are living in right now. but we were interested in getting a support from the Biennale to our work in the most pragmatic way. So when the exhibition is over after 6 months, those coins will still be money. So they will all get back to the bank, and then we will use it to continue the processes that we are building there.
So some spoiled Princeton kid, you would call it a research-based installation, no? Okay. Vuoi dire qualcosa?
Yeah, perhaps, it's just another add to the before-mentioned points. In the morning, I read in a German newspaper about the opening of the Manifesta in Zurich, which is an art exhibition, a Biennale, and it described that it's all about the projects. Because it's about the professions, and the artists had something like companions. They spent almost a year with, and they produced co-projects, the artist and the professions from Zurich. And I think one opportunity exhibition and also an architectural exhibition has for architects that they can make projects, and it's that they can add something new, and that they can use all the energy of this huge exhibition to add something of a certain value to the world, and to, of course, start then with the project a kind of public discussion, which is, I think, one of the main things in this Biennale, that it's so about new projects. It's not showing the new museum, or just. I think there are so many things which are just produced for the show, which is adding new thoughts and values to the world, and perhaps not. It's also adding a really value.
I thank you. I was considering this morning. This is a render-free exhibition. No, that's a very interesting. In 10 years, the renders disappeared, and I think it's a very good news. No, in the end, a rendering disappears from architectural landscape, which is interesting. One question to Giuseppina on this. Su questo, no, te la faccio io la domanda, poi tu dici quello che vuoi. Però diciamo, I've seen many installations that Giuseppina is something in between a technical engineer and an artist. So when you go to an exhibition, I mean, it wouldn't be very different if it was an art exhibition, no? So is that the moment where architecture and art get closer? No.
Però,
I know you would say no.
Però conosci pure
Ma l'ho detto apposta.
che io sarà 5 anni che conosco gli architetti, cioè prima non ne conoscevo, cioè le mie frequentazioni con l'architettura io di architettura non so nulla, lo dico sempre, no, è vero. Cioè, io sono nata e vissuta tra l'arte contemporanea, e ritengo anche che mostrare l'architettura in una mostra sia una delle cose più difficili. Io credo di aver visto tutte le mostre possibili d'arte dal 1975 ad oggi, e mentre di biennali di architettura, mostre di architettura, io non ne ho mai visto. Tu sai che ho fatto 3 mostre recentemente, e in 3 mostre mi si è chiesto di fare una cosa sul mio lavoro, e io non ho mai mostrato dei progetti, e ho sempre fatto delle installazioni, diciamo, che spiegassero il senso e che portassero la discussione sul senso del lavoro, non sul prodotto realizzato. Io sono una che i prodotti realizzati molte volte non li vede neanche, cioè l'ultima fase del progetto a me già non mi interessa più, quando gli operai stanno uscendo fuori. Quindi non...
No, for me this was an important... I asked Giuseppina, no, if what was the, 20 years ago, architects Frank Gehry and Zaha, they would kill each other to build a museum. Now Zaha died, but Frank Gehry and whoever else, David Chipperfield would kill each other to be in a museum. So this is a completely different situation. And I had Giuseppina because, and she, of course, she was offended by my question because I am supposed to know that she knows nothing about architecture, she said. She's not interested in architecture exhibitions. She goes to every art exhibition, and I think this is important. This is me. This is not translation. Art was forbidden for Italian architects. I was a student in the 70s. She was a student a few years before. I teach since the 80s. Art has been completely erased from the panorama, from the view of Italian architects. So I am very happy she said this, because Giuseppina is basically the only, because why? Because Aldo Rossi, Scolari, all these people, they thought they were the artists. And they have no contact with the art. So Giuseppina was basically the only Italian architect who chose to live her experience closer to the art, and so to develop a very different way.
Ma sono un architetto io, non sono un
I know,
artista.
as an architect,
No.
as an architect. Ho detto prima un ingegnere addirittura. So when she's asked to do an installation, she never even thinks of showing a work, but she only wants to show the way she thinks. And she doesn't even care what the project is in the end, but I don't believe to this. But anyway, ho detto che non ci credo, che non ti interessa come il lavoro riesce, certo che ti interessa.
No,
No,
non è che mi interessa poi come vive la gente dentro, sì, però non sto poi, mi hai capito? Cioè, io molte volte li vedo dopo un anno quando sono già occupati.
No, ma questo secondo me è
interessante. Che è la cosa che mi
interessante.
interessa, poi il resto.
But anyway, it's there, no? Because I work in a museum. We live in this. What is art doing to architecture? What is architecture doing to art? It has also a second phase which has to do with our role in society, I think, with the way we engage community. C'è qualcuno che vuole fare una domanda? Any questions from the public? They're all architecture maniacs here, so. Vado avanti. Qualche ora dobbiamo chiudere? No, I have another question for you, because it's very much in discussion today. This Biennale has been very much presented as this kind of architects back to the idea that they are part of society and how they fight for many different things in society. In the same days, we know that it's, I work with students, I go to exhibitions, I go to schools, and I think that the word utopia is coming out every 30 seconds in the architecture world. But then when I think of utopia, I feel closer to the realism you were mentioning before. So what is utopia? Utopia is when you sit when you design an ideal city for the perfect ideal city for the new million of people, or is it when you work hands-on with the community? I don't have the answer, no? So I'm Italian, so theoretically I should be on the ideal city side. But I think because what is utopia probably is also what politics is, no? Because there's no utopia without a political vision. So I'd like to know if your work has anything to do with the vision in this sense.
It's pretty hard question, I think.
It's a bastard.
But I think, I don't know, a writer, Uruguayan writer, he said that utopia is what keeps us moving towards some unreachable goal, Galeano. And I think that all the works are trying to move ourselves forward to some unreachable goal. I think that every one of us have this idea of, I don't know if it is through architecture that we have this idea, but we have this idea and our position about consumerism and about this world as getting too much resources out of everywhere. And I think that I don't know if it's a question for architecture. As I said before, I think that deepness in architecture is quite interesting, but the deepness of life is enormous. And so I think that architecture is only the last layer of this utopia that we are trying to reach.
It's utopia, I think, is a very twofold term because it contains hope and the ideal, but it also contains a kind of paternalistic view on things. When you look at modernism, they knew exactly what the life of people was going to be, and they thought people need to adapt to their ideal family, to the ideal city. And we are always very careful as well in teaching, as in our project in the office, to look at what we're doing, whether that's utopia or not. With the utopia, you might lose the curiosity for the processes of life. It's one wonderful term you said, the deepness of life. Yeah, with utopia is always a simplification.
Yeah, but of course, somehow I think we are somehow in love with this oversimplification of modernity, which we lost. Not we, all of us lost 30 years ago, or more than 30 years ago. Which is still left somewhere, that life is so easy and we can just plan everything. And this is one side of utopia, but the other side is that in each project, utopian project, there's this and this is why I really love the utopian project of Italy in the 60s, that they are so somehow a little bit dark, or that they incorporate. Yeah, but because they somehow incorporate criticism in them, and I think criticism, of course, is just one fundamental thing of architecture. I think you can't produce architecture without criticism.
The problem is we're still paying the bill for that utopia.
Well, I was thinking when you make the question that, well, first they say that, at least etymologically, architects are first than architecture. The word was first, architect, than architecture. Yeah, but if architecture is living and the depth of life, living in spaces, living in cities, living in community, and all that, that thing, living, it's prior to architects. So I think that there's a thing in and I was going to say the discipline, but I think that there are some layers in architecture. One is the anthropological dimension, the other is like the disciplinary dimension, and another one is like this, well, the legal and the artistic and all that dimension. And always there's a question about distance, how far away we put ourselves as architects from that society that lives in spaces, that builds spaces, or how close we want to be. Whenever we have to be in that, because we're part of society in the end. And I think that it's maybe cyclical. I don't know if one of the things that I have been asking myself about this idea of the new fashion of architects and society and all of this, with this biennial and all of that, is how fast we forget that 40, 50 years ago in the 60s, it was the theme of architecture. And 60 years ago, I don't have, when Rudowski was doing architecture without architects, it was the theme of our, it's like a cyclical return of this idea of society. So what I hope is that it's not only an economical effect, that crisis pushes us to go back to society, and whenever crisis is over, we will go back to this figure of the architect taking distance from society.
So I guess to answer your question about politics, or through the idea of utopia at least, I think on a philosophical level at least, we're anarchists in a way, in that very deep built into our practice is dissensus and argument and constant change. And I think there's something that we recognize collectively, and there aren't many things that we agree on actually, is that people need to change. And they need to feel things changing. And the thing that a lot of us love is doing things with our hands and making mistakes and making again. And so we met those opportunities. But without a belief that you're reaching towards an optimal solution and deferring things for the future. I think it's really easy as an architect who has a great responsibility for the future to always defer things to the future, but people live in the present and things get made in the present. And so pulling the time scale of architecture back to now and what you enjoy and what other people are able to enjoy, and how they want to live, that's a kind of utopia, to not be stuck.
It's a utopia of empathy.
Maybe.
Giuseppina, ti interessa? Posso fare un'altra domanda a partire da te?
Fammene un'altra, sì, perché tanto adesso mi ero persa.
No, but no, I have one last question. I mean, if nobody wants to stop me, and it is, I mean, I am a son of, I'm not a son, I was a son of anarchy when I was very young, but then I was a son of, I studied in Venice. I'm a son of utopia. And in the 80s and 90s, I had to realize that the people who were supposed to live in this utopia my masters were designing hated it. And they want to build their house by their own. They didn't want the architect to shape their life. And they were so angry that with the architect, they would call anybody else to build their house but the architects. So Italy became, I mean, a beautifully devastated country with no more space to build, basically. And I realized that, and then I realized that this is some kind of order. It's a chaotic order, which sometimes works very well, actually. If you don't care about beauty, it works very well, because if you go to, I mean, the proximity you were talking about, if you come in one house in one of these super productive regions, like Veneto or like the Marche, you go in one house, you find a space to live, a space to produce, a space to sell, a space to cultivate in one house. So the house is a city. No? And this is very productive. This erases the trois établissements humains by Le Corbusier, the Corbu division. So it's somehow progressive with being regressive at the same time. So now some of my colleagues, even your project, are pushing us, let's go back to design housing. And I question myself, does it make sense? So we should rather build the theaters that the Assemble does, or let the people call Giuseppina when they want, when they're ready to to deal with the architect. So should we work on the public space and let people do whatever they want with their housing, which is what the people ask us to do in Italy? Or should we should we learn how to build a single family house like the Japanese? No? In Japan, you do a single family house of 40 square meters. There's no luxury in this. Italian architects in the 50s and 60s, when they built a house, they would not publish it. They were ashamed. It was not politically correct to publish it.
Scusami, ma io non ho capito bene la domanda.
Te la dico in italiano, se mi dai un secondo. So, should we simply leave laissez-faire? Should we go back to build, the Aureli answer, the dogma answer? Or should we learn how to find a contact place, how to work with the people to build their houses, not ours? Quindi la domanda, Giuseppina, è: secondo te gli architetti devono tornare a costruire housing, oppure devono fregarsene del tutto, oppure devono costruire le case quando hanno la possibilità di fare come case, non come...
Intanto purtroppo noi siamo obbligati a costruire il momento in cui le persone ci chiamano, ne hanno bisogno, perché mi pare che noi non facciamo gli artisti, cioè io non mi posso mettere a costruire una casa, sì, lo posso fare allora faccio un concorso, dico non ho bisogno di... Quindi penso che noi dobbiamo costruire per le persone e dare delle risposte a chi, quindi non è solamente la casa, ti dico, può essere il chiosco dei giornali, può essere il marciapiede, può essere la panca, può essere un oggetto di uso comune. Penso che noi è la richiesta che avviene dal basso.
Se ti riformulo, I rephrase the question. You're teaching a third year.
Ma dimmelo in italiano.
Se insegni in un laboratorio di terzo anno, preferisci dargli come tema una stecca per 3.000 famiglie o una casa simile?
Allora ti rispondo, le volte che ho insegnato io sono partita da piccolissimi lavori, peraltro neanche molte volte nuovi, perché sai che io provengo dal restauro, quindi di solito ho dato o vuoti urbani o spazi di scarto o piccole costruzioni su cui c'era la possibilità di... Dunque, questa è una cosa perché...
So I forced Giuseppina into an answer, and the idea was, would you build a housing project or a house? And she said, of course I will build a house, because the people only ask for the house, so I do what the people ask. And then I asked her, what would you do if you're a teacher in a third year studio? Would you give them a housing project for 200 families, so you would rather do a single family or small object? And she said, of course, I always gave my students a small object.
Sì, ma è molto interessante comunque, cioè io non vedo neanche grandi differenze, perché il momento in cui tu ti occupi, ho fatto anche degli interventi diciamo per gente che non conosci, non c'hai un committente davanti, io penso che lì è molto interessante il lavoro che possiamo fare, perché in qualche modo dobbiamo inventarci uno spazio che si può, sotto la spinta, diciamo, dell'azione di chi abita dentro, può assumere anche un'altra forma e altre. E allora dico, io penso che a me mi interessano tutte e due le cose, sia lavorare per una specifica persona e sia lavorare per un committente che non c'è.
Yeah, in the case we are in conditions of designing a housing project. She thinks what is interesting for architecture is understand where the limits is, when the architect knows he can stop and then let the people who live in the place evolve it, transform it into their living space, which I think, I'd like to hear some German comments on this. Because we have when we get into the blue model, we think we're in front of a utopistic housing project. Yeah.
Of course, that was the intention to kind of pose that question. When you look closely, you see all these little scenes of anarchy in the model. You see that it's a mixed structure. You see its openness. And I think what's at stake is the question, how much do we rely on the process? How much do we let things go? And what is the responsibility of the architect to produce utilitas, firmitas, venustas? Because that's what we are trained for, and this is our intention. And we try several techniques, and we do believe in the Brechtian principle of estrangement. That means, how do you reach people? What do you give people? And if it's just a little off, you know, there's just things are not correct, things are not linear but somewhat disturbing, we believe that might change society and the notion of architecture. And I mean, we don't know the truth. And for instance, with our building in Hamburg, we thought, wow, we are going to introduce this wild, you know, everyone can do what they want project, and it's going to have a very wild facade. No. The people wanted to have a sober house. They didn't want to show that, you know, it was built in a self-built process. And I think the same thing also happened to Alejandro's projects, Elemental, that some of them were plastered over, you know, kind of looked like a regular house. And this is something that people want. And how do you deal with that? I think we have different forms of aesthetics. You know, we like this truth of this is a self-built project, so it's supposed to look like a... Huh?
Anybody else to...
I was just going to say that in this kind of discussion, it's really easy to create a kind of false dichotomy between self-led and top-down, right? And to proactively and properly create the conditions for people to express themselves in the way they live, you have to design loads. It is a design challenge, and it shouldn't be expressed as a non-designed activity. If anything, you have to design more. And I think that it's really easy to get quite lost in the space in between and think about it in a very literal way. I mean, we're working on houses in Liverpool at the moment, and the question is not to literally give opportunities for people to express themselves on their facades, in their gardens, but to listen very carefully over a number of months to the people that live there now, to observe their houses in a great deal of detail, and then to reproduce and learn from them in the way you design for the people that will come into that street. And I think that, I don't know, it's just important to think that self-expression does not mean non-designing. Yeah.
Io credo che quello che ha detto lei, forse è la stessa cosa, che è possibile progettare, almeno io lavoro su questo negli ultimi anni, un dispositivo, perché poi alla fine qualsiasi cosa diventa un dispositivo che, insomma, questo dipende da noi, che possa evidentemente all'occorrenza adattarsi ad... Allora, è molto difficile fare questo, ma insomma io in alcuni progetti credo di esserci riuscita, quindi la questione è questa, che il dispositivo deve essere assolutamente... Il progetto c'è sempre. E poi bisogna anche avere il coraggio, credo questa è un'altra storia, che nel momento in cui noi interveniamo fino a un certo punto e poi dobbiamo abbandonare il lavoro come si chiama? Il costruito all'uso, e quindi le persone, io aborrisco gli architetti che impongono scelte precise, che ti impongono come vivere, che poggiano una cosa di qua e la deve stare, tutto questo mi fa orrore. Il momento in cui noi l'abbandoniamo, evidentemente la vita si deve sovrapporre e diventa un altro elemento di progetto, perché il progetto dopo 20 anni diventa completamente un altro. Ecco.
Giuseppina says that first of all we have to face our times. We need to consider the project, the design process, as an adaptive device. So the adaptive device can probably work well even for one family, that for more families, and for evolution in the cityscape. And the other thing, which is was a very big debate, I think, in architecture some years ago, is this idea of if the architect's work has to describe how far the architect's work has to describe the life. And think of Scarpa, no? Or lead the life of the person within the space. We today tend to think that the final layer of a design is the people who live the space. No? So the architect has to be able to know where its work stops, and then the life will come and give a final shape to what it does. But I think we all agree on this. I think we could even, if you don't have questions and if you don't want to add anything, I have another 20 questions, but I will send them personally to the speakers. I thank very much the Biennale. I hope, of course, we have not been as brilliant as the macho wasp panel of the first week, but we did our best, and I hope we had some fun. I thank enormously our speakers, which have been a great, great contribution, I think, for the Biennale. This is the first time in 30 years, Manuela knows, that I'm not writing a review of the Biennale, no? Because I had a very good excuse for not writing a review on the Biennale this year, but I think that the Biennale made it, because we have a great variety of situations. We are not really, the Biennale, I don't know if it's Alejandro's skills or not, or maybe the casuality, maybe the layering of ideas and things, but I think the diversity of the answers we find in the exhibition is very satisfying. So I thank every one of you for the contribution he gave to this wonderful project. Grazie.